Looks like the attendees are still populating. Should we start? Thumbs up. All right. Members of the Public Safety Subcommittee, members of the audience, thanks for joining us tonight. Our presentation tonight is probably going to be about a half hour. Matthew's going to start first, and then Jonathan and Corey, and then I will finish up. And then we can open it up for public comment and discussion and direction by the subcommittee. The last meeting we had, well, there was a meeting in between there, but the last meeting focused on this subject, I believe was in September. There was another public safety subcommittee meeting on a specific topic, the Sandra Harmon shooting. But I believe the last time we had a discussion about what we were working on was in September. And as I said at that meeting, we were working on two different endeavors. One, two directions that the council gave us. And I think I said at some point, these directions really are going to merge together. And I believe they have. I mean, it doesn't make any sense anymore to say we're working on two separate endeavors here. We are doing this public outreach, and this component is so important in feedback we get to then move forward and decide what kind of things we should be working on to improve public safety in Half Moon Bay and really start to look at what would be considered contemporary practices, 21st policing practices in the future. So that's why we're kicking off with Matthew. He's been leading up that effort on the public outreach. So with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you. You can go first. We did put a slide in for questions at two intermediate points. Questions after Matthew's portion, questions after Jonathan and Corey's portion. If you want to do that, fine. If not, it might be easier just to let us get through the whole thing and wait till the end. Matthew?
Great, thank you, Bob, and glad to be with you, council members and members of the public that are attending today. As Bob mentioned, I've been working with staff and the community on outreach to gather feedback and input from community members around law enforcement and the relationship with the city and sheriff's office here in Half Moon Bay. So I'll present an update on that effort, and then Corey and Jonathan will present the work that they've done on the white paper study. And then Bob will present some information from the International City and County Managers Association and work that they've done around law enforcement. So around public outreach, we've been working with Council Member Penrose on how to gather information from the community. And when we kicked this off several months ago, we realized that one of the biggest constraints we were going to have is working on this type of a subject, a very sensitive subject, sometimes polarizing subject, and trying to do our engagement and outreach in a virtual environment, in a Zoom environment. And so where we decided to start was to hold focus groups with some small stakeholder groups to gather feedback and input that eventually could be used to inform future meetings. And so you'll see on the left the different groups we've been working with. The items in black are the ones that have already taken place. The items in yellow are ongoing or scheduled in the future. And as you can see, we actually held a youth meeting yesterday. City staff did not participate in that. We worked with the Youth Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit here on the peninsula that specializes in engaging and working with youth and empowering them to participate in the public process. So they held a focus group yesterday, and they're doing some follow-up interviews with some of the youth that couldn't attend yesterday. And then we'll also look at maybe holding another youth group in the future. We have a meeting with the faith leaders next week. Several of our local faith leaders from congregations up and down the coast will be meeting with us and sharing some of their experience and input and those of their church members. And then we hope to hold a follow-up to the youth sessions with youth leaders, folks like the Boys and Girls Club, sports coaches and leagues, school district staff, and educators to get their perspective on law enforcement and youth as well. And then, as you can see on the right, there's a lot of recurring concerns and conceptions. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But I would say the one main common thread through every discussion was mental health and concerns about mental health and how individuals with mental health struggle in their interactions with law enforcement. And so we've decided once we're done with the smaller stakeholder groups, we'd like to hold a larger meeting specifically around the topic of mental health. And we'll probably have participants from all the other stakeholder groups and individuals that are experts in mental health care and intervention to help guide that discussion. The goal of these focus groups, again, is to gather information based on a few questions we ask, and they are, in all of these groups, we've asked, what have your experiences and interactions with law enforcement been like in your life? What have your specific interactions with the sheriff's office been like? What areas do you think need work? And what ideas do you have for making improvement in law enforcement and the relationship between the community and law enforcement? And as I share on the right here, there's been a variety of concerns shared. And I list them as concerns and perceptions because often it's really just the perspective of the individual and how they interact. And I think perception is as important as reality because it really is the reality for the individual experiencing things. And so even if something isn't quite accurate, if the perception is that there's racism happening or a risk of immigration problems, we have to find ways to overcome that perception, even if it's not true, so that people can get through the fear and distrust that we've heard from the groups and the perceived disconnect from the community. So, these are a variety of concerns we've heard, and we think that there will be opportunities in the future to address these concerns and perceptions to better improve the relationship between the sheriff's office and the community going forward, and the city and the rest of the community as well. And I think it'll help guide some of those efforts. As far as future outreach goes, we hope to wrap up all the focus groups by the end of next month. We have a few more things planned before we get to the holidays, and then I believe we'll need a few weeks into January to wrap up those meetings. When those meetings are completed, we plan to put together a report similar to what you see after we do our city council listening sessions and other outreach events that will summarize what we've done, what we've heard, and help make sure that people can see that their concerns were heard, they were noted, and that they're part of this process. The other thing we want to accomplish early next year is the community survey. We've been focused on these very specific, different groups in the community, but we also think it's important to hear from everybody. There are going to be different perceptions, different experiences, and we want to get a broad range of input from the community. I think the questions will be similar. We will probably work with some sort of organization that specializes in these types of surveys to make sure we're asking the right questions in the right way so that we're not biasing the answers or swaying the answers, and we can get really good data from that survey. And then when we've completed all of those efforts, and hopefully when the white paper study that you're being presented with in draft form tonight are completed, we hope that those can all be pulled together to inform a series of community workshops that we'll do early next year. And we don't know exactly what the format of those will be yet. We do know that we want them to be facilitated and well organized and well planned so that people can feel like they're productive and move these conversations forward in a positive way. We've engaged Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, who we've partnered with before and really specializes in this kind of work and has been doing these types of workshops with other cities over the last couple of months. And we're hoping to utilize them to facilitate these workshops. Following all of that, obviously, we need to circle back to the entire city council and provide them with the results of everything that we've heard and the ideas that we've heard. and that can start to inform for future discussions of the council as we think about our future relationship with the sheriff's office. If there's any questions on that, or we can move forward through the presentation with Corey and Jonathan.
Let's go ahead.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Good evening, Councilmember Rarback, Councilmember Ruddock, and community. Jonathan and I are here to talk about the Public Safety White Paper draft, and I will be doing the first half. So if I can have the next slide, please. So the purpose of this paper, and it is a current working draft, is to give our community background on a very important topic, law enforcement. We feel that researching historical as well as current event information, we can have fully informed conversations moving forward with a wealth of knowledge. This paper also acknowledges that there's more awareness currently regarding law enforcement and how it affects our society. Throughout this paper, a few topics we focused are on history, budget, other contracting cities, services, policy, processes and response, as well as current events. Next slide, please. History. The first item we decided to focus on was history, as we need to understand how we got to where we are. The city faced an economic downturn around 2010 to 2011, and after numerous community and stakeholder meetings, it was decided that the city would put out a request for proposal, also known as RFP, for police services. The City of Pacifica and the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office both participated, and eventually the city selected the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. The Sheriff's Office's jurisdictional areas, actually, let me go to amendments first. It would make a little more sense. So there are 12 amendments to this contract. Amendments can be a change in staffing, a change in services, or as small as a change in annual increases. And they also have to do with extending our term of the contract. As of note, our current contract expires June 30th, 2022. So jurisdictional areas. The Sheriff's Office jurisdictional area under the contract for the city is for Half Moon Bay city limits. They're filling the gap that the disbandment of the Half Moon Bay Police Department left. To note, the Sheriff's Office does have jurisdiction in unincorporated areas to the north, so in Montera, Moss Beach, El Granada, and parts of Miramar, as well as areas in the south, such as San Gregorio, La Honda, Pescadero, and many of the other South Coast areas. Next slide, please. So budget, as it says, law enforcement usually plays a large expenditure in most city budgets. And every year the city goes through a budgeting process to allocate funds towards contracts, projects, and other city services. In 2011, public safety was approximately 39% of the allocated budget at $3,563,709. And that was our last year of the Half Moon Bay Police Department. It was also the lightest staffed year, as each year prior, police were cut as a cost-saving measure. For example, in fiscal year 2007-2008, sworn staff dropped 2 personnel members each year until 2011. In 2010-2011 fiscal year, $2,800,286 or $68, were spent on salaries and benefits alone. The total net cost currently for our contract in 2020-2021 is $3,005,642, a dramatic decrease from the last year of having our own police department, and less than 25% of our city's budget versus the 39% of the budget in 2011. We continue to have a cost savings yearly due to our contract. Next slide, please. Comparison cities. Within San Mateo County, there are about 4 other municipalities that contract with the Sheriff's Office for their police services. The cities and towns would be the city of Millbrae, the town of Portola Valley, the town of Woodside, as well as the city of San Carlos. Millbrae began their contract with the Sheriff's Office in 2012. For their fiscal year of 2019 to 2020, they paid over $6 million for their police services. Their switch to the sheriff's office led to approximately $1.1 million a year in savings for them. In Portola Valley, in city of Woodside, they've been under sheriff's office police services since before both of their incorporations and have joined forces together for their contract negotiations for one unified contract. Portola Valley pays approximately $1.26 million or budgeted for their fiscal year of 2021. And Woodside has about $2.08 million for their fiscal year of 2020-2021. The city of San Carlos began contracting with the sheriff's office as their cost savings method in 2010. For the fiscal year 2021, they're budgeted to pay about $9,270,076 for the sheriff's office for their services. In addition, neighboring counties have the contracts as well with their respective sheriff's department. For example, the Santa Clara County area has the city of Cupertino, the city of Saratoga, and the town of Los Altos Hills that contract with their county sheriff's department for their police services. Next slide, please. So the city of Half Moon Bay has provided 10.86 full-time equivalent personnel through the current sheriff's contract. And the sheriff contract also offers other services to the city besides personnel. They have the Sheriff's Activity League, also known as the SAL program, which provides youth with engaging after-school programming and other activities. It's designed to develop relationships between deputies and their communities. The Sheriff's Office spent about 544 hours in fiscal year 2019-2020 with the youth. Some of the programs they had were Empowering Young Women, where they had about 40 young women participate. They had their Young Men's Group with about 10 high school men participating, and their Junior Police Academy with about 20 elementary school children participating. Due to COVID-19, they had conducted youth tutoring and worked with the Second Harvest Food Bank to give back. There's also the CARON group, which is the Community Alliance to Revitalize Our Neighborhood. And they function to cultivate relationships between law enforcement and the community by providing families with education and resources to maintain healthy communities. During COVID-19, they reached out to participants from Half Moon Bay via phone, checking in to connect them with food assistance, rental assistance, and mental health assistance. In addition, they also had Donuts for Deputies events, as well as Parents Helping Parents workshops. They have the Gang Task Force and Intelligence, as well as PERT, the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. PERT is composed of one sheriff's detective and one licensed mental health clinician from the county's Behavioral Health and Recovery Services Unit. They respond to psychiatric emergencies, review all sheriff's cases that possibly involve mental illness and mental health, and conduct follow-up investigations as needed. Their goal is connecting patients and families with resources or services to reduce tragic outcomes, incarcerations, and to assist in managing behavior. In fiscal year 2019-2020, they had 49 referrals in the Half Moon Bay area. And I believe I'll be passing it on to Jonathan.
Thank you, Corey, and good evening, Councilmember Rohraback, Councilmember Ruddick. We want to talk a little bit about the policing process here on the coast side and more broadly in the state of California. Sheriff's deputies and the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office is a member of what's called the Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training, or POST. And POST is a voluntary program in the state of California with more than 600 participants. And these agencies, to be a part of POST, have to meet minimum requirements. And some of these requirements include the length and the quality of training for their cadets. POST requires that all of their agencies the cadets have at least 664 hours of training. And in some cases, some departments require as many as more than 1,000 hours of cadet training. POST also has 41 different categories for curriculum. That's just the minimum. Different departments may have additional, but this is the minimum standard. And some of these include leadership, professionalism, cultural diversity, patrol techniques, community policing, vehicle pullovers, a lot of basic and standard procedures that many police officers would go through on an average shift. Not only that, but San Mateo County Sheriff has 20 hours a year minimum of training. That's a county standard for all of their employees, and that also goes for the Sheriff's Office and for the deputies here in Half Moon Bay. Also with, besides posts, San Mateo County Sheriff's Office is currently working on meeting 8 Can't Wait, which is a program designed to reform different police responses. Currently, they follow 6 out of the 6 out of the 8 policies, and the 8 policies are a ban on chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation, require that all alternatives are exhausted before shooting. It requires officers to intervene when excessive force is being used by other officers. It establishes a force continuum, and it requires comprehensive reporting. The other 2 are a ban on shooting at moving vehicles and requiring a warning before discharging their firearm. San Mateo County Sheriff's Office has modified rules for that. They can't just do it, but they don't technically meet the standards set out by 8 Can't Wait. And 8 Can't Wait became popular in the last few years during the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, and after the death of many deaths in 2014, particularly in Ferguson, Missouri. Next slide, please. So part of the reason why this paper is being crafted is because of the current events that have happened this year in 2020. Nationally, the deaths of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, and others have led to more nationwide protesting and outrage at the national level, and protests have occurred all across the country, including here on the coast side. There's also been a spike in popularity of the Black Lives Matter movement, which began a few years ago. And as of just a few months ago, the Black Lives Matter movement was actually receiving its highest popularity since its formation. Locally, the death of Sandra Harmon earlier in the year, and again, the protests over the shootings on a national level have brought policing techniques and procedures into focus. They have been in focus, I would say, for many years, but this has been a major resurgence because of the events that have happened this year. Next slide, please. So the proposed reforms for policing, this is broad, and this doesn't necessarily apply to just the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office. This is kind of a national effort that different agencies and different activist organizations have brought up as possible solutions to police violence and police procedures. One of them is the idea of a civilian police oversight committee, and a brief background on that. They were formulated in the late 19th century and greatly expanded in the 20th and early 21st centuries to impartially review police conduct and make recommendations for improving practices. As of 2016, there are 144 civilian police oversight committees in the United States, including more than a dozen in California. The committees are usually born out of crisis after a major event. For instance, in Los Angeles, after the beating of Rodney King in the early 90s, that led to the creation of their civilian police oversight committee. They're broken into different models that, again, change over time depending on how people feel about reform. For example, there's a review-focused model which reviews the quality of an investigation conducted by the Internal Affairs Unit if there is a shooting. So the police department, they're essentially reviewing how well their internal review is. There is no known record of a city the size of Half Moon Bay having its own oversight committee. The smallest one in California is in the city of Davis, which has a population of 70,000, and it also has its own police force, and Half Moon Bay does not. It is contracting out with the sheriff's office. As I mentioned earlier before, 8 Can't Wait. These are the 8 procedures that are recommended to de-escalate and prevent police violence. Again, the chokeholds, de-escalation, and the county meets 6 out of 8 of these, plus a modification of 2, the shooting at a moving vehicle and requiring a warning before shooting. Next slide, please. Nationally, there have been calls by some activists for defunding the police. Defunding the police is a very broad term. It means a lot of different things to different people. So I don't think there's a uniform standard for that term. But more broadly, it means relocating or redirecting funding away from police departments to other government agencies. And this could be for mental health. It could be for drug counselors, social workers, non-police units. An example of this happening was in Camden, New Jersey in 2012. They disbanded and completely recreated their police department. There have been calls for completely disbanding police departments, but I don't believe that those have been realistically proposed and implemented. And again, the term defund the police is politically charged, and it means a lot of different things to different people. It can mean defunding it completely or just reforming it and restructuring it. And there's been a major call for more mental health resources, and that can happen in a lot of different ways, whether having more counselors, having more mental health clinics, providing easier access to mental health services. And how that relates locally, the Llanero Serrano Garcia shooting in 2014 has led to the Llanero Serrano Presente program, which is designed to provide mental health services here on the coast side. It's designed to reform how law enforcement engages with people suffering from mental illness. And the program is attempting to raise funds for mental health services that are culturally and linguistically relevant for communities on the coast side. And it would also provide a hotline for feedback or complaints from the sheriff's office. Another feature of that is an orientation for new sheriff deputies to meet community leaders and Spanish-speaking residents for officers who may not live on the coast side to have a better understanding of the community that they're policing. Next slide, please. Any questions for either of us?
Well, I'll wait. I have a lot of questions and comments, but I think I'd like to hear the rest of the white paper, and I'd certainly like to hear what the community has to say first. So thank you.
Well, let me finish up, Councilmember Rarbeck, and then we'll go to community input and your questions and discussion, as you say. So after, working on this, and you just heard where we're at from Matthew, Corey, and Jonathan, we're not alone. So just recently, I was at a meeting where a gentleman made a presentation to myself and some other city managers, this is just 2 weeks ago, about a recent panel discussion on contemporary policing practices that ICMA, the International City County Management Association, put on. And he basically summarized kind of that panel discussion and work that was going on from ICMA on developing strategies that might be helpful for jurisdictions, cities, counties like us who are looking at this and taking a look at where we're at on providing public safety services, how we're doing, and how we might be able to do better based on everything you just heard. So if you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start by these slides came right out of this presentation I saw, and then there's some resources here that I think are very relevant. And the reason I'm sharing them is we're going to post this online and make it available to the committee, the council, and the community, anyone who's interested. But there's a lot of material out there, and it's not stale material. It's very fresh material. And this is the kind of material that Corey and Jonathan have been researching in preparation for this meeting today and the ongoing efforts that we're going to have. But this document here is worth the read. It's only about 40 pages. It's dated August 2020, put out by the Conference of Mayors. So I wanted to just make note of this, that this is ongoing, and we need to be kind of following. It does make sense that here we are in Half Moon Bay, but also following this same conversation that is happening all over the nation, and learning what others are doing and what they're going through at the same time. I think that is just really a relevant point. So again, we're going to put these on the website. This one I think is a great read, and would encourage the subcommittee when they get some time to take a look at this, as well as interested community members. Again, there's like 2 or 3 of these I'm going to show. This document is on training and recruitment, a little less relevant for the city of Half Moon Bay. And I think that's an important point that we can get into further as we open up the dialogue. And that is the key difference of us being a contract city. We contract with the sheriff, and that certainly puts us in a different position than other cities as they grapple with this, ones that have their own police force. And so there are some things we're in control of, and there's some things we're not in control of, and there might be some things that are in the middle. And that's where we're probably going to spend some of our discussion today, I have a feeling. But we have some leeway in the contract about the deputies that are assigned to us. But again, generally the recruitment and training practices of the sheriff, we probably don't have a lot of control about. But I still think this one's also a good read, because from what we're seeing out there, a lot of the focus is on recruitment. A lot of folks and studies that we're reading acknowledge that that's one of the keys, and the people that are being hired into police departments, which then lead to the culture that is developed within police structures. So this one's a good read as well. It's about 36 pages, not too long. Next one. So this one's a pamphlet. This is a really quick read, 4 pages long. It's an executive summary, if you will, of a grander effort. If you can go to the next slide, Jonathan. This one, many of you have probably heard of. This was the president's task force, not our current president. This goes back to the Obama years. It came out in either 2015 or 16, I believe. And this is also recommended reading. And the document from the Conference of Mayors really built off of this. This came out obviously 2016. A lot has changed since then, and I think the Conference of Mayor document is an update, if you will, based on current events and what's going on now. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just show 3 slides of some strategies that have really come out of these documents and came out of the panel that ICMA put on. They came up with 15 strategies. I eliminated some because, as I said, some strategies simply do not apply to us, given that we're a contract city. And I'm going to share these not because we believe that these are the answers to what we're discussing today, and we know exactly what to do, but it does give an idea of some themes, I think, of where we need to put our attention. And this is where it goes back to the efforts of community engagement, the focus groups that Matthew's working on, and the feedback you saw that he's getting. I think it was really powerful to see those 10 bullet points of what he's hearing. And as he said, it's even if it's perception, this is something we have to be conscious about. And so a lot of these strategies, I think, have to do with the fundamental kind of contract between the community and policing, which is built on trust. The community has to recognize the legitimacy of policing, and the police as the guardian of the laws of the community, and there has to be a trust there. And we can show stats about how much it costs to police in Half Moon Bay, and how it's much less expensive than it was 10 years ago. We can show crime stats of how relatively speaking, crime is very low in Half Moon Bay. But the strategies that we're seeing, the conversation that we're gleaning out of the literature is that it goes way beyond that with regard to community policing and other measurements that are important. It's not just crime stats, but it's more the customer service that people feel they're getting that matter. And so I won't read through these. You had a chance to read them. The second one, obviously, again, has to do with trading. Don't skip through them all, but I'll hit them really quick. Did you go to the next one already? So again, some of these we have control over, some we don't. The first two here have to do with use of force, the use of force policy, the 8 can't wait, something we can certainly talk about today. But these ones are more in the category that, given our nature as a contract city, there's less room for us to have an impact in this area. Next slide, please. And then here, I think it's really important, especially the first and the third, develop and maintain ongoing relationships with community groups and organizations. This is really what we're doing right now. So on the one hand, we've been spending all this time on this for 6 months and everyone's waiting, like, what's the answer? But what we're doing is part of the answer, actually. The process here, I think, is almost as important as the final result. And the work that Matthew's doing is just critical to start recalibrating that foundation in Half Moon Bay for what the community wants from their police force, and to the extent that they feel they can trust us, and that it's, like I said, legitimate. So the third bullet point, also something, this came up at the last meeting. I think a member of the community brought this up. We had already talked about it with Councilmember Penrose about doing a survey. And then I think a community member brought it up as something we should do as well. And we do intend to do that. You saw the schedule that Matthew put up on doing a survey in either the first or second quarter of next year. So I show these to kind of give a flavor of, okay, now we've seen all this, where should we maybe focus our time? And I'll caveat that by saying we really do need to sync the two efforts up. And I don't know if I should say wait, but part of this process is getting through the focus groups and having the community workshop and getting all that feedback, doing all the listening before we jump to the solution. We're getting there, and I know it's taking some time. But if we jump too fast before we've listened to the community, then I think we're setting ourselves up for problems. But the themes are starting to develop. Next slide, please. So in my opinion, we're at this point, and this could change, but I think it comes down to two areas that we should focus our attention. And maybe no surprise here, but I think the two areas are mental health services and community policing. And you'll note that this is probably not a lot different than what they came up with in the Yanara Serrano Presente program. The 3 or 4 bullet points that they came up with there had to do with mental health, building the relationship between the police force and community members. I think they also had something on use of force, maybe, and so forth. But here we are 6 months later, and in reality, I think we're right in line with that document that was presented to the council now about 6 or 8 months ago. So I'm not going to go into a lot about community policing. That could be a whole 2-hour discussion. But I think what's important here, and there's another document that I give the website to that's a crash course, I suppose, in community policing. But I think what's important here is, again, the nature of us as a contract city. And that's the challenge on embracing this idea of community policing really being pervasive in the community. If you were to ask the sheriff's office, do you support community policing, and have you set up your structure to embrace community policing? The answer would absolutely be yes. And some of the programs that Corey showed is their community policing programs. There's no doubt about that. But I think because we're a contract city, the questions that we're going to be grappling with is it really scaling to our level? The county is an enormous organization. The sheriff's department is an enormous organization. And when they look through the lens of community policing, they look through it through the lens of who they are and their organization at the county level. We're a small community, 13,000 people. We contract with the county. And the question as we start to understand what it means to have community policing is it really being scaled down to the level that works for our community? And I think that's where we really need to put a lot of effort. Again, not going to go into a lot of detail of the kind of the pillars behind community policing. I encourage people to go to that website or do some research on their own. But I think from what we're hearing from the focus groups on the trust issue and the other bullet points that you saw, this is where it's one thing to say we have community policing. It's another thing for actually to live it and for it really to be pervasive in the culture of the individuals that serve here, not just the whole sheriff's department. This quote is from one of those documents I shared. It's from the original document. No, it's from the Council of Mayor document that just came out in August. And I just wanted to finish with that. Because as I've said, this really is the backbone of where we, I think, need to put some effort if we want to improve. We have a good situation. It was shown by Corey and Jonathan that we have a cost-effective contract. We get a good deal. We've shown through quarterly reports that Saul provides that our crime stats are very good. But what we want to do is not sit on that. I think what we're hearing is, what can we now do to make it better and keep improving? How do we keep improving the process? So I'll end with that. Sorry that went a little longer than a half hour, but I'll turn it back to the committee, and you guys can decide if you want to ask questions, go to public comment, and then bring it back to dialogue and next steps.
I would like to hear from the community first.
Okay, right now we have Bill Balson with his hand raised. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Balson. I live over in Ocean Colony, and I have a couple of questions. First for Matthew. When we last met, Matthew, you said in response to a question I asked that you thought it would be reasonable to expand the scope of the focus groups to include a broader cross-section of our communities. I didn't really see a lot of that in your presentation. It looked to me like you're covering 15% maybe of the population. I can tell you that I have pretty intimate knowledge of about 1,300 residents here in Ocean Colony, and I don't really see a big presence of the city on this issue here.
Thanks, Bill.
I have other questions for Jonathan, and
Oh, okay.
but that's a question for Matthew. Do you want me to go with all three questions before they answer, or do you want me to pause?
If I may, and subcommittee members, I would recommend we hear from all public comment, let them ask their questions. We'll certainly take notes.
Okay.
And then we'll turn it back to the subcommittee for your questions, and you can then ask staff to follow up and be ready to address what you heard from the community members at that time as well.
Okay. For Corey or Jonathan, I have two questions. The first is, in assembling the report that you prepared, did you have anybody on your team, or did you consult closely with anybody with law enforcement experience? And have you ever, for example, participated in post-training? And then secondly, have you collected data on complaints against the sheriff's department? And then I would just observe that I've submitted written comments. I'm hoping, willing to answer any questions about my written comments. And I would Second, Bob Nesbitt's quote that he put in the most recent slide, and simply observe that that quote applies equally to all public servants, not just police.
Fair enough.
That's my comment.
Thank you, Bill. Are there any other members of the audience who wish to provide comment? Okay, Karina Leibowitz, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just think I unmuted. You guys can hear me. So first, thank you very much for this process. I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the way you're engaging with various pieces of the community. Some of my comment echoes a little bit what we just heard, and it's really around how other groups can also get involved. So I think we have a lot of interest from various sections of the community. It sounded like possibly the later community session was going to be for that, but I was a little unclear on how that was going to be organized, who gets brought into it, etc. Me and others I've been talking to a lot have been doing a lot of thinking and research and work on this topic as well, and so we're very interested in the city's process here. And so similar type of question is around how and what is the most effective way to feed that information through so it can be part of the set of data that you are all considering and thinking about, and as you run through this process yourselves. Thank you also for the additional resources that you shared here today. I think that's going to be very interesting reading, and I appreciate that. I have a number, just like a ton of additional, very detailed in the weeds questions, and I do not know if it's the appropriate place to like raise them here, or if it's better to do that in some additional sort of community engagement sessions. So questions around sort of this topic of the limited ability we have to have control over the sheriff's office because we have a contract with them, right? Like I fundamentally don't really understand why we can't build in additional performance metrics around these additional things we care about in the contract, right? In any other circumstance, of course, that's a very common thing to do in contracts. And I recognize I'm not terribly familiar though with this particular one. So, and maybe another question, and this is just out of ignorance, so excuse me, is the current contract with the sheriff publicly available for people to review and look at? Okay, I'll find that on the website, thank you.
I believe it was attached to the packet tonight. Was it the full
Okay.
contract attached tonight?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for not having found
Okay.
that. Well, so I mean, I'll stop there rather than go into like the set of complete questions I have. But I want to also thank you guys for noting and thinking about particularly the Serrano Presente program. That really resonates very strongly with me as a very well thought out proposal. And so I know that it's been on the top of your minds, and I think, in my opinion anyway, rightly so. Thank you.
Thanks, Karina. Are there any other public comments? Okay, I think that's it.
And I'll just reiterate, members of the subcommittee, we all took notes. We can certainly, as we respond to your questions, also answer the questions we heard from the two members of the public whenever you feel that's appropriate. I think all of those questions we probably have answers for. So you let us know when you want us to filter that into the discussion.
I think you could answer the questions now.
All right.
Yeah, I agree.
Why don't I go first and try to do an overview? And I'm sure I didn't get them all as good as you guys did. So then each of you can jump in as well. So starting with Mr. Balson's regarding the focus groups. I think Matthew is probably ready to hit the trigger and has a good answer for why we went with the focus groups we are. And we recognize that those focus groups do not, those 8 groups do not make up all the groups in the population. They do not make up all 13,000 people. So I'll let Matthew go a little more detail of why those focus groups. And certainly it was not the intention that by listening to those groups that what they have to say is somehow more important than others in the community. this originally did start as a community workshop, and we still plan to do that. And I think this also maybe answers Karina's question. Yes, when we get to that workshop, it's going to be advertised far and wide, and everyone in the community is welcome to come to that workshop and participate in that. So yeah, after I'm done, I'll let Matthew jump in a little bit more on how he chose the focus groups and why we did that instead of just jumping to a big community meeting. There was a reason for it. With regard, I'll answer the questions for Corey and Jonathan, but they can certainly jump in. They have been consulting with law enforcement through our chief of police, Sal Lopez, all the way along. Sal would be here tonight, but he had already scheduled some time off. But he has been participating with us internally, and they met with him to do a lot of the work that they did. I think there was a question about whether they themselves have ever participated in law enforcement. I'll let them answer that. I'm doubting that they have. And the question about complaints, that's a great question. And I don't know to what extent that was part of the assignment, but I think it's a good point. We are, as was indicated by Corey, it is a draft document, and there are a few areas. There's going to be another chapter, so to speak, to this document before it's finalized. And a little of the work that we're still working on is revenue. We're still, there's going to be a section on the revenue from tickets, COPS grants. That part was still not done. Training. So there is work to do, and I think it's a good question about looking at complaints and seeing if that how that helps the discussion. So I don't know if that was something that was done yet, but I know that they do keep a log of complaints. So good question. And then finally on Karina, how does she get involved? She can send her, if she has more detailed questions, please send them to us. But as I said, the community meeting is going to be well advertised and open to the entire public. And I think the question about the sheriff's contract and what we can control and what we maybe can't control, I think that's going to come up more once the subcommittee asks some questions. So I'm happy to go into that further. But the simple answer is, I mean, there just simply is some things that we can do. For example, in the Presente program, one of the bullet points is we need to put an effort on having new deputies meet community members. Within the contract, we absolutely have the ability to do that, to demand that, and make that a part of our culture here in Half Moon Bay. So there is an example of something that's in our control. I would say, as an example, and maybe this is a controversial one, the 8 can't wait is something that may not be in our control. The sheriff does have a policy on use of force. They have recently made amendments to it, and they did make a presentation to the entire council about that recently, and they went into some detail on the 6 that they do comply with and the reasons for the 2 they don't. When I was reading one of the documents, I think it was the mayor document, they had a section in there that basically agreed with the sheriff that the two that they don't comply with, they had the same caveats for those 2, and one is shooting at a vehicle and or being in a vehicle and shooting, and one is also warning someone that you're going to shoot before you shoot. And you might remember that the sheriff had caveats on both those, that they strive for that, but it's impossible for them to guarantee that. And I read that in other literature. So that's just an example where if we were to say, we demand that you meet these 2, I think the sheriff would say, well, I'm not going to, because there's really good reasons why we don't meet those 2. So that's just an example for Karina on what we can control and what we can't. But I think we'll have a lot more discussion on that topic. Matthew, Corey, or Jonathan, if I missed anything, and if there were some specific questions for you, Corey and Jonathan, and you want to answer them, please do.
I'm happy to jump in and just provide a little more detail. on both questions from Mr. Balson and Ms. Leibowitz. Yes, Mr. Balson, I note your question about making sure that we're gathering data and information from all members of our community and not just specific groups. And to Bob's point, that is the plan for these larger community meetings. The focus groups were chosen based on a couple of different criteria. One is the groups that we're meeting with have, I would say, a different experience with law enforcement than the general community, certainly than my own personal experiences with law enforcement. And for some of these groups, they represent individuals that often don't tend to have a voice in these types of processes. And you hold a big public meeting, you obviously anybody can attend a city council meeting or this meeting at any time, but there are barriers for certain populations. And so the purpose of the focus groups, one of the purposes was to try to eliminate some of those barriers, create what I'd call kind of a safe space for individuals in those groups to talk and to share and to feel safe about sharing those experiences, whether it's due to fear or language difficulties or a variety of other reasons. They also, I think, were aimed at just helping us to inform our broader discussions. So when we meet with nonprofits and faith leaders and you know the service providers around mental health services or homeless services, I think it's just going to help us to provide, along with the white paper study and some of the information Bob has shared tonight, a good baseline of information so that when we start to talk with the broader community about their experiences, but also solutions and ideas for the future, we're all starting at the same base of information. So, you know, as Bob said, we do not believe that what we're hearing is representative of the entire community. Frankly, that's why we're doing it, because we want to make sure we're hearing from parts of the community that we don't normally get to hear from through our normal processes. And through the community survey, which we plan to have it be a very broad survey to collect, you know, from across the entire community, and the series of workshops that we would like to hold early next year. Part of the reason I listed multiple workshops is we find that even for the broad community, you've got to hold them at different times, sometimes in different places, to again remove barriers, whether it's family schedules, family dynamics, whatever it might be, to get as many voices, which is really what we want at the end. We want as many voices as possible and as many perspectives as possible, because there's two things we're doing here. We're doing a data analysis and collecting data and information from that standpoint, but part of this is that relationship, that personal relationship between the people in our community and the law enforcement that's here to serve and protect our community. And those perspectives are very, very broad and different based on experience. And so, you know, we're just hoping to be very comprehensive in this process so that we can make good decisions for our community moving forward. And I guess just hopefully that answers a lot of Ms. Leibowitz's questions, but to Bob's point, we are happy to have individual discussions at any time. Please reach out to us with any of your questions. And certainly we did get Mr. Balson's email earlier, and I think he made some important points. And if Karina, if you would like to share some of your perspectives, all of that can be part of our planning for our bigger community meetings to make sure we're sharing the right ideas and information.
Are there any other public comments?
No.
No. I guess I'll jump in then. It goes without saying that public safety is, from my perspective, the most important service that we can provide the community. It's really immensely important. So I take this responsibility very seriously. It's been 6 months since the council first talked about forming this subcommittee, and That's a long time, and I understand that. I was disappointed that it's been that long and that this white paper posed a lot of questions, but not any real policy alternatives. On the other hand, having listened to Matthew and Bob and Corey and Jonathan, if, and it's big if, you really go through with the report out from the focus groups, you have the rest of the focus groups, the community survey, the large community meeting, and it's really done in a transparent and community-based way, then I feel less nervous about how things are going. So I really am going to hold your feet to the fire that you really do that, because it's really important. I had listed a few of the questions I had, but I'm not going to go through them in detail because I believe they will come out with a community survey and the community meeting. I just want to reemphasize that the Yanira Serrante, Yanira Presente proposal makes a lot of sense to me. And I think you're going to hear more and more that underserved people in the community are going to want to have that implemented. So uh, that's important to me and to the large fraction of the community that feels left out. Um, Again, it goes without saying, we've had two women who are mentally ill in the last 6 years who were shot. Um, and it's not clear to me that they had to end up that way. That we really need to explore alternatives so that mental health professionals are available when these sorts of uh, mentally ill people threaten themselves and others. Um, I think that's pretty much where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I agree with Harvey. I feel a lot more comfortable this evening after hearing your presentation that that we're progressing in a rather deep way actually to get the community input and getting some answers. I think staff has brought forward a lot of great information for this meeting. Thank you, Corey and Jonathan and Matthew and Bob. I'd also like to see those reports. But I want us to sort of have like a roadmap. I want us to have, identified what problems are we trying to solve here, right? There's a lot of information, we're swimming in it, we're getting a lot of public input, we're going to get more public input, but I think we need to start focusing. And Bob focused on, community policing and one other thing, but there may be more, and we don't have to tackle all of them, but I think we want to identify the problems that have been raised. And then, so before coming to strategies, like what are the problems? Define the problems. Maybe you define them as questions. Is this a problem? Is excessive force a problem? I actually think excessive force is a problem that we want to look at because 2 people have been killed with, a reasonable person could, opine that excessive force was used, right? So, that's 2 people. To me, that's enough to consider the issue of excessive force. So I think we want to identify the problems that are feasible for us to try and solve through our contract and interactions with the sheriff's office in the county. And then the problems that are less solvable that way. What are the costs involved? Both financially and social costs. But I want us to start narrowing our focus of vision to the things that we can actually deal with. But before we get there, I want us to address some of the things based on George Floyd and our local circumstances. I think excessive force is one of those. And our ability to get at that because it is cultural and because it does involve training that's, you know, outside of our purview. I want us to talk about that. It concerns me. And I know it concerns other people in the community. So we need buckets. What are the problems? You know, what ones are feasible for us to solve? Which ones aren't? What might be some policy options for addressing it? Maybe the Yanira Serrano Presente, which I agree with Harvey. I think those are some, you know, interesting and good recommendations for consideration. So let's start narrowing in as we proceed through this additional, you know, community input. I think that'll help the community focus rather than just open mic meetings. You know, where are we headed here? And then move back from that. I think that would help me. You know, once I start swimming in data, I start to get worried that I'm going to drown. You know, I need a lifeboat. I need a, you know, something to hang my hat on. What should I be thinking about? What should I be focusing on? So I think that's where we want to get. And I totally agree that this is a complex, very serious issue. I agree with Harvey that public safety is number one. And I support the community process around that. But, you know, let's start identifying, you know, some concrete, you know, directions and some policy options. Even if we don't pick all those options, how can we start to guide our thinking and our input, right? So that would be a big help, I think, to the council and the community. So I appreciate the level of effort that staff is putting into this. Like I said, I get concerned when time elapses and data flows and I don't see where we're going, but you've helped me tonight, so I really appreciate that. And I actually not sure that there's a reason to have another meeting of the subcommittee. I think we want to have staff devote their efforts to, you know, the larger community input in addressing concerns like bills and Karina's. And one question I have for Jessica Blair is there a way for people to sign up to get meeting notices, emails about, you know, rather than just trying to remember to go to our website to see meetings? Is there a place you can sign up to get noticed for, you know, council public meetings, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there is. There's on our homepage, we have a notify me button and people can select a number of different subscription lists. This meeting was sent to our city council agenda list as well as our special meeting notification list. The city council list has almost 1,000 people on it.
Great job. Okay, that's good. We don't want people to feel like it's not a transparent process. And I think, you know, so far so good. So sign up, folks.
Yes.
And, you know, again, I really appreciate that staff has said to folks who are listening in, you know, send us your questions. You know, we're happy to answer them. So you don't have to wait to a meeting. Recognize our staff has a lot on their plates and trying to make progress on stuff. But, you know, City Hall is pretty responsive, I find. So thank you.
I thought I'd share the website so people could actually see it. So here's our website. It's hmbcity.org. And if you just scroll down a little bit down the page, here's the notify me button that Jessica just described. And if you click on that, there's a sign up process. So real easy for folks to do.
And if I could respond, just thoughts going through my head based on Councilmember Rarbeck and Reddick's comments. So I same place as Councilmember Reddick in terms of all the work that we've done up to this point and the continued work that we have by going out and still listening to the community was trying to do the same thing and start to get it down to some areas we could focus on. And that's why in my last slide, I came down to, you know, it finally dawned on me, it's like, it's community policing, whatever that means, and we need to put some work into that, and it's mental health, which are two not small areas. And you have added the excessive force, and that was one that was very close to being on my list. And I think it's also very related to training, because the conversations you hear besides the policy of an organization is then the you know, okay, this is the policy. Maybe we can't change that, but is the training appropriate for de-escalation? And will they follow it correctly in the field when they're out in the field? And so that really relates to training. And that's an area back to what do we have control over and what do we not? That's one I'd put in the maybe column. They have a pretty rigorous training program. San Mateo County Sheriff prides themselves on their training program. I think Jonathan and Corey spent quite a bit of time with Saul going over training, and they pride themselves on their training program. And so you then have to ask the question, if you add more training, does that accomplish anything? At some point, there's the law of diminishing returns. And so I agree with being careful that we just don't simply jump to solutions and say, oh, we got it, more de-escalation training that will solve everything. Well, we don't know that for sure. But again, respect that that's a third area because of what Councilmember Ruddick said. That's a big topic. That's what we hear about. We can't let that go. And so we will add that back to our list. Last comment I want to make, and it kind of goes back to really, the challenge of this and respecting and again, appreciating the desire for the subcommittee to move along. And it's been a while, and the challenge of this. And so the other point that came down on my list was mental health, which is a very big, challenging area. And so you start to look at this and say, well, okay, well, what are others doing? What can we do as a contract city? And again, you start to realize that solutions are not easy. We could say, oh, okay, let's hire our own mental health person. Let's add a position to and do that. How do we know that would actually work? What would that accomplish? A mental health PhD is a very expensive position. Cities don't normally provide that service. And the question is, how effective would that be in coordinating with the sheriff to actually provide better service to mental health and minimize the times when sheriffs are called on to do things that are outside their purview. So I just give that as an example that it's difficult. But what we could do, is, well, the county has a huge mental health department, enormous, and they're going through this same conversation, and they're saying, and they have more ability to do what you see some other cities in the nation doing right now, which is saying, hey, we are going to maybe reallocate some budget. We are going to move some money from our sheriff's department to our mental health department. I don't know if San Mateo County is doing that, but they have the ability to think about those kind of things. And as a small city, I think we have the ability to talk to the county and say, hey, we want to think outside the box. We know you provide great mental health services and we partner with you on all these things, but how do we go to the next step? How can we be the guinea pig for something new that the county can provide to us that gets at this challenge of law enforcement being law enforcement and mental health and where the two merge and getting to those things that you've read in the news about, oh, well, you get a call for mental health and we shouldn't send a police officer, we should send a mental health practitioner. How can we, tap the county to help provide services that are just a total paradigm shift on what they've done in the past. So again, I say all this not to ramble, but to just show it is challenging. And I think it is something that we shouldn't rush on and apologize that it took this long to get to this point. But there's more work to do. I think this is going to be all of 2021. I really do. And I do think focusing, as Councilmember Ruddick said, if these are the three areas, that really helps us in looking for solutions.
I just want to make the point that there may be more. I think what we want to do, though, is get the list of problems out there and then, which are doable, which aren't. So maybe we eliminate some of them, but I don't want to constrain people from identifying other issues as problems. And then I don't necessarily think we have to hire our own, mental health professionals, but if there are, cost efficiencies, in the sheriff's contract that we can find, maybe as part of our community services grants, we give, some money to, mental health activities in our community. So it's mainly like, how do we distribute resources that make us a stronger community and help us work better with each other, and the police. Frankly, I'm not even thinking about eliminating the number of FTEs in the sheriff department that we have. I don't think that's reasonable. I mean, there are guns all over the place. There are, white militias forming. I don't feel comfortable reducing our police budget in terms of personnel. And I don't want to jeopardize our ability to, deal with a traffic stop and somebody has a gun, or a domestic violence situation where there's, gun or other weapons. So I don't want to diminish the value of our, sheriff's deputies. To me, that's kind of something that we have to protect. But are there policy options to manage our resources in a way that strengthen the community and strengthen the community's relationship with law enforcement, and for us to have more of a say on how law enforcement affects our community? So I'm not in favor of, sort of defunding the police in the sense that I want to eliminate positions or not do policing. In fact, there was a story today about, Minneapolis that sort of led the way, and we're going to defund the police. And instead, they're holding fast with the same number of personnel, and they're freeing up money in their budget for social services. Oakland just backed off their defund the police. That was another article today. So as we're developing our own policies, people are already like have gotten into this and are thinking about it, going, I don't know. So, which supports the process that we've been going through. So, a bit on staff, but so that's kind of where I'm going to be going. Not defund personnel or defund what they do necessarily, but how do we deliver public safety services in a more comprehensive way? Because it's more than just cops on the beat, right? In addition to how they behave on the beat. So, I'm rambling, so I'll stop there.
Yeah. Oops. And can you still hear me? I'm losing my. Everyone hear me?
Yes, we can, Bob.
I'm losing my video.
If I might
I
jump
appreciate
in.
that. I appreciate those comments. Am I on? And for the record, I was being facetious about recommending. I certainly wasn't recommending creating a position for a mental health practitioner, but I did want to use it as an example of the challenge here on mental health. And of course, with this year and the pandemic, I think mental health issues are only getting worse. And so huge societal problem in terms of putting resources to mental health issues. And then of course, where mental health issues start to intersect with crime.
Absolutely.
If I could jump in here, just as I've been thinking through some of the things I've heard and some of the clarity that comes from a meeting like this, which is really fantastic. Thinking about Councilwoman Ruddock, your thoughts about starting to focus the conversations and the discussions towards identifying the problems and then how they can be solved and whether they can be solved. That's one of the things we're trying to figure out with these community workshops. And I do think that is probably the focus we need to put on them is we'll finish these focus groups. We'll do a community survey that will be broad and just kind of be that free-for-all collection of information. And then I think we need to plan our workshops around very specific topics to get some really specific information out of them. So that's going to help us plan. So thank you. And then I think when you talk about how we solve some of them, we don't have the answers of how, but I think there are categories of things we can work on. One is, how do we use the sheriff's contract to change the way the sheriff delivers or improve the way the sheriff delivers public safety here in Half Moon Bay? And there are certain things we can control and certain things we can't. And then there's, what are things we can do as a city organization with our staff and our resources and our connections to better serve the community from a public safety standpoint. And then, of course, we have the ability to influence state law and lobby our local and state representatives. And I think that's another place that we need to be thinking is, what sort of policy issues do we think need that broader look from the state? And, you know, we work with a firm and we do our own work with our representatives. And I think that needs to become a focus of our legislative agenda. And
I
then, of
totally
course,
agree.
yeah. And
You
then,
know,
of course,
a lot of our problems are because the state, you know, closed mental hospitals. You know, I mean, that's got to be rethought. And that was just totally among the worst governmental political decisions of all time, you know. So I won't go there, but yeah.
And I will say, from the focus groups, you know, and I think in all the work that we've been doing, it's not all negative. We know that we have low crime rates here in Half Moon Bay. In the focus groups, even when there's a lot of frustration and concern shared, we've heard some really great stories about individual interactions where we have deputies that really are focused on truly not just enforcing laws, but serving the community. I'll speak to one specific example. When we met with the actual homeless individuals, we met with about 20 homeless individuals a few months ago. And there were as many positive stories as negative stories, which was really encouraging because it shows us that we have some of the right folks working in our community that are more focused on, there was one gentleman that was feeling very dehydrated and kind of disoriented because of that. And you hear stories of someone's disoriented, they're having a personal health crisis and it's interpreted the wrong way and it goes the wrong way. And a deputy recognized this crisis and went to the store and bought food and water for this individual and went out of his way to go and find this guy again and provide it. And it really inspired confidence from that individual. And it's those types of experiences that start to, you know, we talk a lot about the sheriff's office and deputies need to see the community members in a different light and kind of see the humanity. And that's a two-way street, right? Our community members need to see the humanity in these folks that are putting themselves on the line every day when they go out and work in our community. And I think that is another focus we want to find is how do we bridge that so that we all see each other as, you know, fellow citizens of our community that all want to make it better. So I think there's a lot that can still be unpacked here that will be helpful in the future.
Yeah, so I don't know if this has come up in your focus groups yet, but you know, I heard from a couple of people around about the time that George Floyd was killed. Actually, I had a couple calls from local folks saying, you know, why do police have to be doing the traffic stops? Can't somebody else be doing traffic stops? And you know, and then one of the conversations, you know, came up like, this is an opportunity for racial profile. And I got to believe that's of concern to some members in our community. And I don't know how big a problem it is, if it's a problem, but, you know, that's something that, you know, when you're stopped and there's this opportunity for racial profiling, it can spiral out of control. It has spiraled out of control, right? Or even like if you're on the street and stopped, you don't have to be in a car. You know, a person of color, you know, stopped minding their own business. You know, that is something that really concerns me. That you know, we need to find ways to reduce opportunities for that. And a lot of that's a cultural change. A lot of that is recruitment. But you know, I mean, that's the kind of thing that just spirals out of control and has all sort of collateral damage when that happens with people of color or anyone. So I want us to be sort of training our radar. You know, people might not be saying that explicitly, but you know, is that an issue? And, you know, how do we deal with that if it is? So.
And I could just anecdotally comment, we have heard some of those types of things. But interestingly enough, the solutions we've heard, you know, because these discussions are not just a complaint session, it really is about being productive and come up with solutions. The solutions we've heard are not bad. It's in the Yanira Serrano Presente program speaks to it. It's with that orientation program. The idea, the purpose behind it is to increase the number of positive interactions between law enforcement and members of the community, so that when you do get into these higher stress, more confrontational type situations, both sides are going into it with a different perspective. If my only interaction with law enforcement is when I'm being accused of breaking a law, I'm going to have a very specific perspective of law enforcement. If all of my interactions with law enforcement are through community activities and positive interactions, my perspective changes. And then when I do get faced with those higher stress situations, I see myself and that person in a different light. So it was really encouraging to hear that the solutions proposed were really about how do we increase the number of positive interactions. It wasn't about how do we reduce the number of interactions between law enforcement and the community because they're always negative. It's just how do we flip it so that the interactions are mostly positive, and that will actually increase the likelihood that a situation that could turn negative remains at least even keeled or more positive because the relationship is already established and different.
And I think that's great. And that's great, especially for people who live here, but we're also a tourist community. You know, you have all kinds of people coming to the beaches, driving up and down Highway 1. So, you know, we want to, you know, we're not going to solve that locally. We can work on it locally, but again, that's like county, state, national, you know, trying to create a new culture of, you know, of policing that minimizes the potential for those sorts of conflicts, you know. So.
Matthew, in your focus groups, did you see a correlation between individual deputies and positive or negative interactions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we got that specific. We weren't asking for names and specific deputies, but I do think there's probably a correlation between individual personalities, and I think that speaks, as Bob said, to hiring practices and training practices. You know, when I'm working with the staff that work for me, I look at them as you know, they need to develop in a lot of different ways, not just in a particular skill. An analyst shouldn't spend all of their time building their Excel and their database skills or their math skills. They still need to develop their emotional intelligence and their public speaking and their writing skills to be a well-rounded employee. And hopefully, and we probably need to get to this at some point, the sheriff needs to be looking at these folks that they hire as not just a person who enforces the law, but someone who needs a diverse skill set to have emotional intelligence and to be able to read and work with people and, you know, and all those things. So certainly I think that's not been specifically called out, but I think over time we're going to see that, you know, that certain individuals are just more prone to have good interactions and others are not. And how do we work with that? How do we resolve that? And can our contract be a tool to do that?
And I think that the public needs to self-reflect and understand how they interact with the police too. You know, right? There's two sides here. You know, what are you bringing to the table when you're calling the police or confronting them about something? You know, it's about, what do you call the police about? You know, are you calling them unnecessarily for stuff? Are these things you can solve by yourself or a neighbor or, you know, a mental health clinician or something else too? So there's really two sides to it. And I was going to say something else, but I think one of the big problems we've had that I think have exacerbated the trend of these incidents is the sort of militarization of the police. Mm-hmm. You know, uniforms and, you know, war weapons and all that stuff, and, you know, the ability to seize people's assets and then sell them off. You know, it's not been a good trend. You know, it's away from community and more about being warriors as opposed to, you know, public safety professionals. So that has not helped. And that's a problem that's got to be dealt with, you know, mostly on the national level, but then on the state level too, because you know, the states and local jurisdictions short on funds are just buying this stuff up. You know, that's a problem. That just creates that culture of you know, an adversarial culture with the public, and it's not good. So
That's addressed in a couple of those reference documents that I posted, and we'll make sure to get that PowerPoint up so you can get those links.
Yeah. I'm interested in seeing it, so.
Final thoughts or direction for us?
no, I think you're on the right path.
Okay, so focus group meetings and big community meeting in first or second quarter and a survey.
Yeah. And
Thanks
focus,
to all of you for the work you've brought to this. Thank you.
yeah, and policies that actually can make a difference. So, yeah.
Thank you, Harvey.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks to the public.
Yep, thank you, members of the public, for joining us tonight.
Be well.
Happy holidays.
See you next week.
The meeting is adjourned.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.